Time now for this week's Goofy Award, and I've never done this before. I'm bringing on some help to do it. And one of the reasons is I feel so overwhelmed, so outraged. The list of adjectives about how I feel about the Supreme Court of Canada refusing to hear the appeal of the BC government's ruling, or, the court in BC ruling, no private care. By the way, my pet is going to be busy at a private vet's office coming up soon. Other friends of mine will be going to the U.S. Why? Literally, a friend of mine needs a knee operation. Walking is very, very difficult for him now, and he said, "Well, why don't you get online? Why don't you wait your 14 months? Why don't you wait your 16 months of inactivity?" And he says that will probably kill me first. I said, "Oh, good, because you can join the other 26,000 Canadians who died while waiting for treatment over the last several years." And so he's going to Arizona, by the way. My point is the farce of what's going on in the medical system in Canada, the pretense that we all have access to care equally, which of course, access to a waiting list is not access to care. Access to, for, as I say, tens of thousands of Canadians dying while they wait for treatment. When you look at some of the other reports, international reports, independent reports ranking Canada dead last on such a huge array of measures about getting timely care. And we have politicians standing there saying, yes, we have equal access to what? Dr. Brian Day is the man who has championed this on our behalf, on patients' behalf in Canada from the Cambie Street Surgery Center. I asked him to come on with me because he'll be more cogent than I am. I'm so outraged by this. Dr. Day, thank you for coming on with me.
You're welcome, Michael.
Let's start with going back a little bit. And I don't want to get into all the history and everything, but I want to be clear that the BC government under the NDP in the early 90s approached you to do this. This is what's such a farce about this at this point. I just want to remind people there's little details like that you might want to know before you weigh in.
Well, yes, the BC government, and they were honestly, I don't criticize them for this. They were creative in the mid '90s and did something that one of the current NDP, the current federal NDP leader, has criticized Ontario for doing the same thing 30 odd years later. Is 30 or so years later is contracting out to clinics that can do procedures on BC residents. So I don't criticize the NDP government of the 90s for that. I think it was the right thing to do, and it's thousands and thousands of patients have had access because of it. But of course, times change. The weight and the NDP of today is not like the NDP of the 90s.
Mm-hmm.
We have a situation now where the minister came out saying how wonderful this was, that they upheld, that they will not hear a decision, any arguments against the decision that the BC courts made. But one of the quotes that maybe the health minister and the premier can take home is the BC appeal court said in their ruling that the court recognizes that the provincial law that they're upholding, they're doing so at a cost of real hardship and suffering. They use those phrases to many British Columbians. They said unequivocally, overruling the lower court judge, that many British Columbians are dying on wait lists. Now, this is not something I would be proud of saying I'm glad they upheld that.
Mm-hmm.
So this, but perhaps even more serious to me is that the judges that have decided not to listen to the arguments on whether, basically whether BC residents should have the same rights that court gave to Quebecers in 2005, those judges are all exempt from the rules. Federal employees are exempt. They are allowed. I mean, I have received checks from the federal government for the treatment of judges, and they are exempt. They're all federal employees. And there are other ways. I mean, I don't resent it at all. But our former Premier Horgan, when he got a cancer, was treated very quickly and appropriately, and he deserved to be treated quickly and appropriately. But we know from data in our trial that some women with serious cancers, like cervical cancers, only 13% are getting treated in the maximum safe time. And this is what has been upheld. Now, the other problem, of course, is that we feel this is an infringement on the rights of residents here, because if you come from another province, you have those rights. So I yesterday I operated on a young man from Ontario who was told he was going to have to wait 18 months. He was a hockey player and came out to BC, and he can do what a BC resident cannot do. And this is, this doesn't make sense. And most of all, I think we are unique on the planet in Canada in having laws against private health insurance. That's unique on the whole planet.
There's so many aspects there. I want to just come back to one, is that what kills me is when I hear the politicians immediately say it proves it's a universal system. We all have equal access. Money isn't determinant. Are you kidding me? I mean, seriously, this is when I said I was outraged. I know for a fact cabinet ministers have jumped. You just gave a couple of examples there. All I have to do, though, is break the law in a serious crime so I can get into a federal prison if I've got something serious. As a federal prisoner, you can jump ahead of everyone listening here today. It's just outrageous, the BS that they've peddled in terms of, oh, we all have equal access. Come on, as you mentioned, judges are jumping in. I won't ask you to give specifics, but I know of a case specifically myself where, oh, well, they aren't waiting. Do you think any of these politicians, if it was them or their family who had a serious issue, would be waiting? No, they would not. Every single person who is making these decisions, part of the decisions from the political, judicial, could be other aspects too. As I say, you could be in the military, RCMP. They're not getting equal access. I mean, they jumped the queue.
Michael, we have had two leaders of the NDP treated privately at our clinic.
Mm-hmm.
This is
Well,
this.
that's
I won't name them, of course, but that's a reality. We had a trial in which those opposing us in court had been treated at our clinic privately. We've had people protesting on the lawns of our clinic who have been treated privately at our clinic. That is the hypocrisy that goes on. And about 30 years ago, I wrote an article in the Vancouver Sun called "The Hypocritical Oath," and this is what it's still going on. And as you alluded to, the wealthy don't need it. The wealthy can go down to the United States, to the Mayo
yeah.
Clinic, Cleveland Clinic. They always have done and always will. But this is about ordinary Canadians. 70% of Canadians have what's called extended health insurance, but it's private health insurance to cover medications, physiotherapy, ambulances,
Mm-hmm.
all arbitrarily designated as not necessary. But the and in Australia, what you might say, well, what about the other 30%? Well, of the other 30%, there's no reason the government, like in Australia, could not pay those premiums for them and have those extended health companies, which they're keen to do, extend the policy so that people who are waiting past the safe time, past the maximum safe time that the government says they should wait, and there are probably 60, 70,000 right now. Before COVID, there were about 40,000 in BC based on government
Mm-hmm.
data. And they would be able to access the care. And if they can't afford the insurance, do what 8 million Australians have their private health insurance subsidized by the state. There's nothing to stop the BC government doing that, and they should, because what we have is not working. People in 2005, the Supreme Court of Canada, in granting Quebecers the right to private insurance, said unequivocally, Canadians are suffering and dying on wait lists. You cannot promise healthcare, fail to deliver it, and then make it unlawful for a citizen in a free country to extricate themselves from that pain and suffering and death, risk of death. So, but in their wisdom, our politicized Supreme Court, and it's more politicized than the US Supreme Court, obviously, has taken the position that what's good for us is not good for you.
It is astounding to see this. I mean, this is, and I said right at the outset, it upsets me. So, but it is astounding that the state is in the way of people realizing, that they're suffering, and the state is saying, no, you can't alleviate it. They're dying. No, you can't prevent that. It's just absolutely astounding. And especially for a system that, look at the Commonwealth Fund, independent, rates the systems of 11 developed countries. Oh, good, we're number 10 in access to care, administrative efficiency, affordability, healthcare outcomes, equity, that kind of stuff. How much worse can we get?
Michael, number one in cost. We're the highest
Yeah.
spend of those countries.
Well, that comes back to the big issue, which is money. I started to be interested in this subject in the 90s also, but it was for a simple reason. I do economics, I do financial analysis, and I got, oh, well, here's a formula that actually can't work. Unlimited access with limited funding. I don't think you needed a PhD in finance or economics to understand at some point that would be a problem. We've had numerous studies that have come out and said it's not sustainable. We've done, fixes for generations, fixes for millennial, whatever it is. It's not worked. Our wait lists continue to be to grow. Actually, at this point, Canadians continue to suffer. That's why I find the decision to not look at this. I think it borders on criminality.
Well, to me, it's fear of decision making by politicians. A few years ago, I was in a debate in Quebec with a provincial health minister, and at the end of the debate, he came up to me and said, Brian, off the record, and he's no longer a minister, so health minister, off the record, every health minister in the country wants you to win in the courts because they're afraid of this topic. They're afraid of it. It's called, people refer to it as the third, electric rail of politics, that they don't want to touch it. But as I said, we are unique in the world in this. And the other thing that we're unique amongst developed countries, the OECD, is that we give our hospitals global budgets every year, so that every patient that goes to a hospital in Canada is using up the hospital's revenue. So guess what the chief financial officer wants to do when the budget's getting tight? Stop treating patients. And this in every other system. So in New Zealand and Australia and in Britain and in the other countries in the OECD, when a patient goes to a hospital, even a public hospital, the state pays the hospital money for that treatment. So a hospital that doesn't treat patients has no revenue, and it has revenue in those countries. In Canada, if we made that simple change, which has nothing to do, and actually, Dr. Les Vitesi led a program to do that a decade or so ago, and it was very successful, but it was a victim of its own success. A subsequent government canned it because it was obviously, initially, when you've allowed hundreds of thousands to climb on the wait list, it's going to cost you a bit of money to get rid of the backlog, but it works to have the money follow the patient.
A couple of things I want people to take away there is, one, keep in mind that wait lists are on purpose. I want the public to understand this. Wait lists are how they're going to control costs, not treat people, in other words. So when you see talk about wait lists, you've got to understand that the government wants that. Their system guarantees it. But the other thing Dr. Day just said, and it's sort of a phrase that people maybe aren't as familiar with, but we do block funding for hospitals. So I've got a hospital and I get my 100 million that year. I don't have to treat anybody. There's no incentive for me to treat, whether I treated 1,000 or 10,000 patients. There's nothing extra. We have to understand wait lists are on purpose, and there's no incentive to treat patients. In fact, it's a disincentive the way we fund our hospitals. So, this is all part of this. And I go back to your point. Yeah, we haven't had it's one thing we don't have politicians with the courage to fix it. I just get driven crazy by the ones who pretend it's not happening. That we do have equal access and there's nothing wrong. People aren't suffering. People aren't dying. It's just unacceptable to me.
So, Michael, another, the appeal court in British Columbia, another thing they said is that the the wait times are in British Columbia flow from government rationing of healthcare.
Hmm.
And that it is purposefully under designed to achieve the goal of fiscal goals. This is the ruling that our current government is kind of saying it's wonderful for us that they said that. Well,
Yeah.
no, it isn't.
Well, and people are finally getting aware of it. You don't have to go further about the healthcare system in general. Now I'm talking, you know, you go to the capital of British Columbia, you go to Victoria, and you see nothing but signs saying we deserve a family doctor. You know, because there are none. It's all of these things. It's coming apart, and hardly news for someone who's lost a loved one waiting for treatment, or someone who's been 14 months and they've been immobile because they need orthotic surgery or something of that nature. Hardly a news flash, but it's coming apart, and they continue to ignore it. They continue to defend the status quo. As Dr. Day says, we're unique. You know, good. Well, we're taking our medical advice, not even from Cuba, who has private clinics that Canadians go and visit. We're taking it from North Korea, even better. You know, it's just an absurdity that the Supreme Court refuses, has refused in this case to address. I think they've failed the Canadian public in this way. As you can tell, Brian, I could go on and on.
Yeah.
Does this
Well,
man ever use oxygen? But I'm outraged.
well, you know who's responsible for the shortage of doctors that you just alluded to, and that is when I came to Canada in the 70s, we were fourth in the world in the number of doctors per population. Guess who cut back on medical schools? And now we're
Hmm.
69th in the world. Government.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
because a commission that the NDP government for launched in 19 reported on in 1991 said that the fact that there are too many doctors is causing costs to rise. They're treating too
Yeah.
many patients, and so their recommendations were followed through on. And nursing schools in British Columbia, you know, at the VGH
Hmm.
hospitals were closed. Medical schools were cut back across the country, actually between 10 and 30%. Guess what? We have a shortage of health workers. Guess whose fault that is? The very government that maintains its monopoly and wants to maintain its monopoly and hides the truth, attempts to hide the truth. And one of the reasons, that I think political ideologies influence the failure of the Supreme Court of Canada to hear this case is they don't want this exposed.
Yeah.
Let's face it, the Supreme Court judges at the Supreme Court of Canada are employees of the Fed and appointed by the Prime Minister and the federal government. It's that.
It's an astounding situation, and it's not changing till the public demands a change. I think we're moving in that direction, but it's not going to happen. We've just proven it's not going to be happening in the courts. Our politicians aren't doing it unless we change politicians. It's going to come from the public. Don't wait until you are the one waiting. Don't wait until someone dies waiting for treatment. Do not wait. Get involved with this. Dr. Brian Day, first of all, I can't tell you what respect I have for the personal sacrifices you've made on behalf of patients across the country. And it's been a great personal sacrifice. You don't talk about that side, so allow me just to state that. Financially, emotionally, et cetera, all done on behalf of patients, Dr. Day. So a big thanks from the Money Talks audience and me and my family. Appreciate you finding time today also.
Thanks, Michael.